Armin had grown up in a place where the sound of gunfire was almost as common as the sound of the morning call to prayer. The land he belonged to had been divided for as long as he could remember. People were taught from childhood that the other side was the enemy. Children grew up hearing stories of betrayal, raids, and loss. And yet, even after years of fighting, Armin still carried a softness in his heart that he couldn't hide. He was a soldier now, trained and disciplined, but he had never been able to turn his eyes away from suffering, no matter whose it was. One evening, when the sky turned gray with smoke and the smell of burning filled the air, Armin and his unit were sent out to patrol a small village near the border. The village had been hit by an airstrike earlier in the day. Buildings had collapsed into piles of stone and dust. The cries of families searching for their loved ones echoed down the broken streets. His commander told the soldiers to keep moving, to watch for any threats. But as they moved carefully through the rubble, Armin heard a sound that made him stop. It was a small muffled cry. At first he thought it was a cat trapped under the stones, but when he leaned closer he realized it was the weak voice of a child. His heart quickened. He looked around. None of the other soldiers seemed to notice or care. They had hardened themselves to the sights and sounds of war. Armin, however, could not ignore it. He knelt down and began moving pieces of broken concrete. With his hands, dust rising around his face. "Armin, leave it," one soldier called out. "We have orders." But he didn't stop. He pushed away a heavy stone, and there, beneath the rubble, was a girl. She was covered in dust, her small arms scraped, her dark hair tangled with bits of ash. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. She could not have been more than 8 years old. For a moment, Armin froze. He realized instantly that she was not one of his own people. Her clothes, the small cloth tied around her wrist, the way she looked, she was from the other side. Every rule in his training told him to move on. This was an enemy child. Helping her could bring him trouble, even punishment. But in that single moment, those thoughts felt distant and unimportant. All he could see was a child who was terrified and alone. Her lips trembled as she whispered, something he could barely hear. It wasn't a cry for her people or for food or even for water. It was a simple plea. "Please don't leave me." Those words struck him like a blade. Without hesitation, Armin slid his arms under the rubble and pulled her free. The girl winced in pain as he lifted her, and he realized her leg was badly hurt. She had scratches all over her arms, and her tiny body felt frail in his strong grip. Dust covered his uniform, but he didn't care. He shifted her against his chest, shielding her as another wall nearby began to crack and tumble. One of his comrades shook his head in disbelief. "You'll get yourself killed for her," the man muttered. Armin didn't answer. He only tightened his hold and whispered to the girl, "You're safe now. I've got you." The patrol moved on, but Armin stayed slightly behind, carrying the girl in his arms. She clung to his uniform, her small fingers gripping tightly as if letting go would mean falling back into the nightmare she had just escaped. Her eyes darted around at the broken houses, the flames in the distance, the bodies covered with cloth. He noticed her tears streaking down through the dust on her face, and something inside him shifted. For the first time in his life, he didn't see an enemy child. He saw just a child, as innocent as his younger sister had once been before sickness had taken her away years ago. As they walked, Armin gave her his water bottle. She sipped carefully, her hands trembling, then looked up at him with eyes that still carried fear but also a fragile spark of trust. He tried to smile, though his own heart was heavy. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The girl hesitated before whispering, "Leora." Her voice was faint, but to Armin it was the most powerful sound in the world. It meant she still had strength. He nodded slowly. "Leora," he repeated, as if promising her that he would not forget. The march back to the safe zone was long. The sun dipped low, turning the sky orange. The soldiers walked with their weapons ready, eyes sharp for ambushes. But Armin's focus stayed on the girl in his arms. Each step made her head rest against his chest more heavily, her small body worn out by the day's terror. At one point she whispered, "Will I see my mother?" Armin swallowed hard. He had no answers. The war had taken so many parents from their children, but he couldn't break her spirit. He bent his head close to hers and said, "Yes, you will. I'll make sure of it." The words weren't a soldier's promise. They were a man's vow. Behind them, whispers began among the soldiers. Some thought Armin was brave, others thought he was reckless. "He's carrying trouble in his arms," one muttered. Another said, "If the commander finds out, he'll pay the price." But Armin ignored them. He walked steadily, carrying Leora as if she were the most precious thing in the world. By the time they reached the edge of their camp, the night had fallen. Fires burned in barrels to give light. Tired soldiers sat cleaning their weapons. When they saw Armin with the child, heads turned and murmurs spread quickly. A guard stepped forward, frowning. "What's this? Why did you bring her here?" Armin stood tall, though his arms ached from carrying her so long. "She was trapped. I couldn't leave her there." The guard scoffed. "She's not one of ours. You know that. She's still a child," Armin said firmly. His voice carried a tone that surprised even himself. "She deserves to live." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The guard looked at him, then at the girl, and finally stepped aside, muttering under his breath. Armin carried Leora into the tent where the medics worked. They stared at him with raised brows, but they didn't turn her away. One of them, carefully, began cleaning her wounds, wrapping her small leg in cloth. Leora winced but didn't cry, her eyes still fixed on Armin as if he was the only anchor she had left in the storm. That night, after the medics finished, Armin sat by her side. She lay on a thin cot, her breath steady but shallow. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or what the commanders would say about his choice. But as he watched her fall asleep, he knew one thing with certainty. Saving her had been the only choice his heart could live with. In that quiet moment, he realized something powerful. The war had always been painted in black and white, but Leora's face reminded him that life was never that simple. She was proof that humanity could survive even in the darkest corners. And though he did not yet understand it, this single act, this decision to protect an enemy's daughter, would forever change the path of his life. The next morning came slowly. The camp was already alive with movement before the sun even rose fully. Soldiers were preparing for another day, some tightening their boots, others checking their rifles. Smoke from small fires drifted in the cool. Air's breakfast was cooked in metal pots. Among all the noise and activity, Armin sat quietly near the corner of the medical tent. His eyes never left the small girl lying on the cot. Leora had slept most of the night. Her breathing was steady now, though sometimes she turned in her sleep as if nightmares still followed her. When she finally opened her eyes, they searched around the unfamiliar place with fear. The tents, the strange men, the smell of oil and gunpowder, it was not her home. For a moment, panic filled her face. Then she spotted Armin sitting nearby, his tired eyes watching over her. She relaxed a little, as if his presence alone gave her safety. Armin leaned forward and offered her a gentle smile. "Good morning, Leora," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she touched the bandage on her leg and frowned. "It hurts," she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, it will hurt for some time, but it will heal. You are strong." Her small eyes studied him carefully as if trying to understand why he was being kind. Finally, she asked the question that had been sitting in her heart since the night before. "Why did you help me? You're not from my people." The words stung Armin, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. In her world, he was supposed to be the enemy. In his world, she was supposed to be nothing more than a name on the other side of a fight. But looking at her now, covered in dust yet still alive, he realized he could never see her that way. "I helped you," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "because you are a child. And no child should be left alone in the rubble. You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago. Leora tilted her head, curious but too shy to ask more. She nodded softly as if accepting his answer, then leaned back against the pillow. Not everyone in the camp looked at the situation the same way. As the day went on, whispers followed Armin wherever he walked. Soldiers glanced at him with doubt, some even shaking their heads. They didn't understand why he had risked himself for a girl from the other side. To them, she was a symbol of the conflict, not a human being. By midday, one of the officers called Armin over. The officer, a tall man with sharp features, folded his arms as he looked at him. I heard about what you did yesterday, he said in a firm tone. You brought that child here against orders. Do you realize what kind of risk you've taken? Armin stood straight. His voice was calm but steady. Yes, sir. I realize it. But I couldn't leave her to die. She was alone, trapped, and helpless. The officer narrowed his eyes. She's not our responsibility. You're a soldier, Armin. Your duty is to follow orders, not rescue enemy children. What do you think will happen when your own people hear about this? Armin took a deep breath. He knew the danger of speaking honestly, but his heart left him no choice. Sir, if we lose our humanity, then what are we fighting for? If saving a child's life is wrong, then I don't want to be right. The officer stared at him for a long moment. Finally, he sighed and waved his hand. Keep her here for now. But understand, this is your problem, not ours. Don't expect support if it becomes an issue. Armin saluted out of respect, then walked back to the tent. His heart was heavy, but he felt no regret. He found Leora awake, sipping a little water. When she saw him return, her face brightened slightly, and that simple expression gave him strength he didn't know he needed. That afternoon, Armin sat beside her and shared a piece of bread. She ate slowly, her hands small and delicate. Between bites, she asked him questions. Do you have a family? She said quietly. Armin hesitated. Memories of his younger sister came rushing back. Her laughter, her illness, the helplessness he had felt when she slipped away. He looked at Leora and answered softly, I did. I had a sister once. She was a little older than you. She was kind and full of life, but she's gone now. Leora's face softened. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave her a small nod. That's why I couldn't leave you behind. When I saw you, I thought of her. I thought, if someone like me had found her, I would have wanted them to help. She didn't say anything more, but her small hand reached out and held his for a moment. That simple gesture spoke louder than any words could. As days passed, Armin cared for Leora whenever he had a chance. He brought her food, water, and blankets when the nights grew cold. He sat by her side when the pain in her leg was too much. Sometimes he told her short stories, simple ones from his childhood, just to make her smile. The other soldiers continued to talk, some mocking him quietly, others avoiding the tent altogether. But Armin didn't let it bother him. His heart had chosen a path, and he would follow it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Armin carried Leora outside the tent so she could breathe fresh air. The camp looked less frightening in the soft glow of the sunset. She rested against his chest and pointed to the horizon. That way, she said softly. My home is that way. Armin followed her gaze. His heart tightened. He wondered if her home still stood, if her mother was alive, if anyone was waiting for her. He didn't have answers, but he gave her what he could, hope. We'll find your family, he promised. You will not be alone. Her eyes lit up, just for a moment, with the belief of a child. She trusted him completely, and that trust felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. By the 5th day, word of Armin's act had spread beyond the camp. Some called him foolish. Others quietly admired him, though few said it aloud. One evening, an older soldier approached him and said, Armin, you did something I could not. You looked at her and saw a child. I only saw an enemy. Maybe you're the one who's right. Then the man walked away, leaving Armin to wonder how one small act could plant seeds of change in even the hardest hearts. But Armin's journey was only beginning. He didn't know that far away, in another camp, a woman was searching desperately for her daughter. That woman's name was Celine, and her love for Leora was stronger than any fear. Soon, the paths of Armin and Selene would cross, and the decision he had made to protect the enemy's daughter would shape not only his own future but hers as well. For now, though, Armin's world was simple. He was a soldier in a war, but his heart had found something worth protecting more than any border or flag. Each time Leora smiled at him, each time she whispered a thank you, he knew he had chosen the right path no matter the cost. Celine had not slept properly for many nights. Her heart had been torn apart since the day the attack destroyed her village. She remembered the ground shaking, the sound of walls breaking, and the thick dust that filled the air. When the noise faded, she had searched desperately for her daughter. She called out Leora's name again and again, her voice hoarse, her hands bleeding from digging through broken stones. But there was no answer. By nightfall, she was certain she had lost her child forever. Still, a mother's heart never gives up. Even when hope is almost gone, it still beats with a small flame of belief. Celine clung to that flame. She asked survivors, she searched nearby shelters, and she prayed every night. People told her to accept the loss, but she could not. She remembered Leora's laughter, the way her daughter used to hold her hand while walking, and she told herself over and over, "My child is alive. I will find her." Days later, Celine heard whispers that a soldier from the enemy's side had carried a child out of the rubble. At first, she thought it was just another rumor, the kind that always spreads during war, but when she asked for details, her heart began to race. The child was a girl with dark hair, about 8 years old, rescued from the very place where Celine had last seen her daughter. The thought filled her with confusion and anger. Could it really be Leora? And if so, why was she in the hands of the enemy? What were they doing with her? Was she safe, or was she being used as a prisoner? Celine's mind twisted with questions. She wanted to believe the soldier had shown kindness, but war had taught her to trust no one. She imagined her daughter frightened, surrounded by men in uniforms, and her heart burned with both fear and determination. Celine began her search with renewed strength. She followed every lead, no matter how small. Finally, after days of walking, bargaining, and pleading for information, she found herself standing near the camp where the soldier was said to be. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached. Guards stood watch, their faces hard, their weapons ready. Celine felt her knees weaken, but the thought of her daughter pushed her forward. When she finally entered the camp under the cautious eyes of the soldiers, the scene before her made her stop in her tracks. There, sitting outside a tent in the golden light of evening, was her daughter. Leora was thinner, her leg bandaged, but she was alive. And beside her, sitting protectively close, was a young soldier in a dusty uniform. He was handing her a piece of bread and speaking to her softly, as though she were his own family. Celine's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she could not move. The relief of seeing her daughter alive was so powerful that her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to run forward, to grab Leora and hold her tight, but her gaze also fixed on the soldier. She felt her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. Was this the man who had saved her child, or the man who had stolen her away? Leora was the first to notice her. The girl's eyes widened and she let out a cry that Celine would never forget. "Mother!" she shouted, her small voice filled with joy. In that instant, Celine rushed forward. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Leora, holding her so tightly as if afraid she would disappear again. Tears fell freely down her face as she whispered her daughter's name over and over. Leora clung to her, sobbing with happiness, whispering, "I thought I lost you, Mama. But he saved me. He carried me out." Celine pulled back slightly, her trembling hands brushing the dust from her daughter's cheeks. She kissed her forehead again and again, overwhelmed with gratitude that her little one was alive. Then her eyes shifted toward the soldier. Armin stood silently, his hands at his sides, watching the reunion with a quiet expression. He didn't step forward, nor did he try to interrupt. His face was calm but serious, as if he knew this moment belonged only to mother and child. Selene rose slowly, still holding Leora's hand. Her eyes met Armin's. She studied him carefully, searching for something, an answer to the question burning inside her. She saw the dirt on his uniform, the tired lines on his young face, and the softness in his eyes as he looked at Leora. He did not look like the cruel enemy she had imagined. Yet her heart, hardened by years of loss, would not trust so easily. "You," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "You are the one who took her?" Armin shook his head gently. "I did not take her. I found her in the rubble. She was alone, hurt. I couldn't leave her there. I carried her here so she would survive." Celine's grip on Leora tightened. "Why? She is not yours. She is not your people." Armin's eyes lowered for a moment, then lifted again with quiet strength. "Because she is a child. Because I once had a sister, and I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. I couldn't let another family go through that if I could help." Celine's heart wavered. She wanted to believe him, but years of pain made her cautious. "Do you expect me to thank you?" she asked. Armin shook his head. "No, I don't need thanks. I only need to know she is safe with you now. That is enough." The honesty in his words startled her. She had expected arrogance or hidden demands, but instead, she found humility. She looked at her daughter, who clung to her hand yet kept glancing at Armin with eyes full of trust. "Mama," Leora whispered, tugging her sleeve. "He is good. He gave me water, food, and told me stories. He kept me safe every night." Selene's throat tightened. She looked at the soldier again, this time with less anger and more curiosity. Could it be true that someone from the other side had shown kindness when so many others had shown only cruelty? Still, she guarded her words. "You may have saved her, but that does not erase the war. Your people have caused us pain. I have lost too much to forget." Armin nodded slowly. "I know, and I cannot erase what has been done. But I will never regret saving her. If that makes me foolish, then so be it." The silence that followed was heavy. The camp noises faded in Selene's ears. All she could hear was the steady beating of her heart as she stood between her daughter and the man who had risked himself to protect her. For the first time in many years, Selene felt something strange. A spark of confusion mixed with a fragile thread of hope. She had lived too long in darkness to easily trust. But the way her daughter looked at Armin, the way her small hand reached toward him even as she held her mother's, told her that this man had become part of their story, whether she liked it or not. That night, as Selene held Leora close, she could not stop thinking about the soldier. His face, his words, his actions, they unsettled her. He was supposed to be an enemy, yet he had done what even some of her own people would not. He had risked his life to save a child. Her child. For Selene, the discovery was not just about finding her daughter alive. It was also about finding a truth she had never considered, that even in the heart of war, humanity could still exist on the other side. And though she would not admit it yet, deep inside, she knew this soldier would not easily leave her life. The days after Selene found her daughter were filled with emotions neither she nor Armin had expected. At first, she stayed guarded, speaking only short words to the soldier, keeping her distance. She stayed close to Leora every moment, not letting her out of sight even when the girl tried to assure her that Armin had been good to her. A mother's heart is slow to trust, especially after so much loss. Yet every time she watched how Leora looked at him, with the same trust a child gives to family, Selene felt her doubts weaken, little by little. Armin never demanded her attention, nor did he try to prove himself. He went about his duties in the camp, helping where he could, and whenever Leora waved at him or called his name, he came without hesitation. He never looked at the child as a burden. Instead, he cared for her, as if she were his responsibility. When Selene noticed this, she began to watch him more closely. She saw how he treated the wounded, how he shared his rations even when food was scarce, and how he spoke gently to people when others used harsh voices. One evening, when the sun was low and the campfires began to burn, Leora sat between her mother and Armin, playing with small stones on the ground. Celine listened quietly as her daughter asked the soldier questions. "Do you have a home?" Leora asked him. Armin smiled faintly. "I did once. A small house with a garden. My sister and I used to play there. But the war took it away." Selene noticed how his eyes darkened at the memory, but he kept his tone calm for Leora's sake. "Do you miss it?" the girl asked. "Every day," Armin answered softly. "But sometimes, when I see the stars, I remember lying in the garden with my sister, and for a moment it feels like home again." Celine's chest tightened. She had lost her husband years ago, and the war had stolen so many friends from her. Listening to Armin, she realized that pain did not belong to one side only. Loss was universal. That night, after Leora had fallen asleep, Celine sat across from Armin. The silence between them stretched long, but finally she spoke. "Why do you stay near us? You could walk away now that I have her back." Armin looked into the firelight. "Because she trusts me, and because I gave her a promise that I would protect her until she was safe. A promise is not something I break." Celine studied him for a long moment. His voice held no pride, only truth. She lowered her eyes, whispering, "Trust is hard, for me, but I see how she looks at you, and I cannot ignore it." Slowly, the days turned into weeks. Their conversations grew less tense. Sometimes they even shared small stories from their pasts. Armin told Celine about his sister's laughter, about his mother who loved to sing. Celine in return spoke about Leora's father, about how he used to carry their daughter on his shoulders through the fields. Both carried grief, and in sharing it, they found a strange comfort. It was not easy. The camp was still a place of suspicion. Other soldiers whispered, questioning Armin's loyalty, questioning why he spent so much time with the woman and her daughter. But Armin did not care. He had long stopped listening to voices that wanted him to harden his heart. Celine noticed his courage. He did what he believed was right, even when others doubted him. One day, Leora fell ill. Her body weakened with fever, and Celine's fear returned stronger than ever. She held her daughter close, praying for her recovery. Armin brought herbs from the nearby fields, water from the cleanest source he could find, and stayed awake at her side, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth. For 2 days and nights he hardly slept, refusing to leave her. Selena watched, her heart breaking with worry but also softening as she saw the depth of his care. When Leora finally opened her eyes again and smiled weakly, Selene could no longer hold back her tears. She turned to Armin and whispered, "You saved her twice now. First from the rubble, now from sickness. I don't know what to say." Armin only shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. Seeing her smile is enough." That simple answer touched her more deeply than any grand speech could. In that moment, Celine began to understand that the bond forming between them was no ordinary one. It was born not from words but from actions, actions that proved kindness, loyalty, and courage. Soon Celine found herself thinking of Armin even when he wasn't near. She noticed his quiet strength, his patience, and the way he never asked for anything in return. She felt something inside her shift, something she had thought was buried forever beneath layers of sorrow. Hope. By the end of the month, people in the camp began to see the three of them together often: the mother, the daughter, and the soldier. Whispers still followed them, but Celine no longer cared. She had made her choice. In her heart, she knew Armin was no longer an outsider. He was part of their lives now, and she would not let anyone take that away. The war around them did not stop. Each day brought new battles, new losses, and new fears. But within their small circle, something different was growing. It was not fragile anymore. It was strong, like roots spreading beneath the earth, hidden, but unshakable. Celine had once believed she could never let anyone from the other side into her heart. Yet here she was, watching her daughter laugh as Armin showed her how to carve little shapes into pieces of wood. She realized that this man had become part of their family in ways she could not deny. One evening, Celine sat quietly, watching them from a distance. Leora's voice rang with joy as she showed her mother the wooden bird Armin had carved for her. Celine smiled faintly, though her eyes were heavy with thought. Later, when Leora had gone to sleep, Celine spoke to Armin directly. "You know what they say about us," she began. "They say we are enemies who can never stand together. That trust between us is impossible." Armin nodded. "I've heard the same all my life." Celine's gaze was steady. "But they are wrong. You risked everything for her. You kept your promise when you could have walked away. And for that I cannot see you as an enemy anymore." Her words carried weight. They were not spoken lightly. Armin listened, his chest tightening with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I didn't save her to change your view of me," he said gently. "I saved her because it was the right thing to do. But hearing you say this, it means more than I can explain." Celine reached for her daughter's blanket, adjusting it with care before turning back to him. "I want you to understand something," she continued. "You are no longer just the soldier who carried her from the rubble. You are part of us now. You belong here, with us. I claim you as one of our own." Armin's breath caught. For a man who had always lived with suspicion and distance, those words pierced deep into his heart. He looked at her, seeing not only a mother protecting her child, but a woman offering him a place he never thought he could have again, a place to belong. The days that followed were brighter, even amid the shadows of war. Leora often said, "Mama, he is like family now." And Celine no longer corrected her. Instead, she smiled because deep down she felt the same. But acceptance did not come without challenge. Some of the other soldiers grew uneasy, whispering louder, questioning Armand's loyalty. A few even suggested that keeping close to Celine and Leora made him weak. Armand faced their doubts calmly, never raising his voice, never fighting back. His quiet strength silenced them more effectively than anger ever could. Celine noticed this too. She admired how he stayed true to himself, how he did not bend under pressure. He had chosen a path of compassion, and he walked it with dignity. One night, as the camp settled under the stars, Celine and Armand sat near the fire while Leora slept. The crackle of flames filled the silence. Celine looked at him and asked, "Do you ever think about the future? About life after this war?" Armand stared at the fire for a long moment before answering. "I think about it every day. I wonder if there will ever be peace. If children like Leora will grow up without fear. If people like you and me can walk the same road without being called enemies." Celine's eyes softened. "Maybe it starts small. Maybe it starts with us." He turned to her then, his gaze steady, and in that moment neither of them needed to say more. The bond between them had already grown beyond words. In the weeks that followed, their lives were shaped by this new truth. They were no longer strangers from opposite sides of a war. They were bound by love, loyalty, and the unspoken promise of a future they dared to imagine. Celine had claimed him not as a possession but as family, a protector for her daughter, a companion for herself, and a symbol of hope that even in the darkest of times, humanity could win over hatred. And Armin, once a soldier who only followed orders, had found something greater than duty. He had found belonging. He had found a family he never expected, a place where his heart could rest. Though the world around them remained divided, they had built a small world of their own, one filled with trust, courage, and the simple but powerful truth that sometimes protecting one life could bring together hearts that were never meant to meet.